The Sony A7R Mark I was released about 10 years ago, but I just bought one in 2025, so let's see how good this camera is today. So this is the package. I bought it used, and you can buy them these days used for about 400 euros. And these days we're already at the Sony A7R Mark V, but this is the first generation, which means that it has a bit less megapixels, a lot worse video quality, but of course it's also much cheaper. Here we go. So we got a bag. And there is the camera itself. You can look at how small this thing is. That's actually pretty insane. And we can see that the sensor is a bit dirty. But that's always the risk of picking something up used. So when you are buying a camera, most of the time you don't want to ship it, but just check it out beforehand. So this is the A7R Mark I. And it has the 4 FPS burst option and also a 36 megapixel sensor. And the first thing that I noticed is that the build quality is actually still pretty good. But what is disappointing is that the grip here on the side, it is pretty small, which means that if you want to carry this for a longer period of time, it's not the nicest to hold. But the camera is really compact for a full frame sensor, and that is because the video capabilities of the A7R Mark I aren't anything amazing. It can only shoot in AVC HD, no XAVC-S, so it can only record up to 28 megabits per second in an old codec. But what is nice is here on the side you actually have a pretty decent selection of ports. You will have your headphone port to put on a different microphone and an audio port, so you can listen back to the audio. But sadly it does have a micro HDMI port, so if you want to do streaming with this might not be the best option. But it does have on the top also a Sony multi-interface shoe where you can also connect something like a flash or a microphone. And what's also so nice about the A7 series, including the A7S but also the standard A7 and this A7R, is that it has a lot of buttons. So you have 3 dials, one for the ISO, one for the aperture and one for the shutter speed. So for the photography you can easily change all the settings while you want to take a photo. And then on the top of the camera we also have an exposure compensation dial and a dial to change which mode you are in. And unlike video cameras, you can't change while recording between aperture priority or shutter speed priority. You are locked in that setting, so keep that in mind when using this camera. But you don't want to buy this for video because it's pretty outdated. It's nice that it has a feature, it's nice as a little bit of an extra, and for photography it's actually still really good. The issue right now is that I only have APS-C sized lenses, so I wasn't actually able to use the full 36 megapixels but only I think about 16. But the results even at those megapixels were still extremely nice in my opinion. You can see a lot of detail that it can easily capture, and also at higher ISOs it still does a pretty decent job. Maybe not as good as modern full frame cameras, but still for the price that you're paying for these things you can get some nice low light photography. So let's now look at some photo samples that I took on the Sony A7R Mark I. And as you can see, even more than 10 years later, the photos that are coming out of this camera look really nice. So if you can't get nice photos out of the Sony A7R Mark I, then you probably won't be able to get much better photos out of the newer Sony. It is still pretty modern for the photography side because of the high megapixel count and the massive sensor. And on the back the camera has a screen which can flip out, but sadly you can't flip it out to the front, so this can only tilt up or down. But still having a tilting screen is much better than having a fixed screen, so it's nice that it has that option. And on the top here it has a viewfinder which also looks pretty good. If you just have APS-C lenses you might want to look at a different camera like Sony A6000 series. But it is nice that if you still have a few APS-C camera lenses around that you can still use those on this camera. And because it has so many megapixels you can crop in the image quite a lot. So also if you're going to shoot larger posters, then this should still be fine for that because of the high megapixel count. But that's also why this camera isn't that extremely good in low light like something like the Sony A7S, which is a much better low light camera compared to this one. And the A7S also has picture profiles and the XAVC-S recording options, whereas this one is just on AVC HD. One thing to keep in mind is that this camera is not meant for sports photography because the autofocus is just not that fast on this camera. For most people this shouldn't be that big of an issue because you can just wait a few seconds and then it has focus, or you can just use the manual focus ring. But keep that in mind that if something is moving really fast, then it won't always catch focus. And also the burst option of this camera is only 4 FPS. And the shutter is really loud, so keep that in mind. Another downside of this camera is the battery life. It is decent, but it's nothing great. It's still using the Sony NP-FW50 batteries, and I can get a maximum of about an hour out of those. And especially if you buy these cameras on the used market, you will see that the battery life has gone down a lot, so you might want to get an extra battery for this camera. So I can't really get a much bigger battery for this camera. So if you really want that full frame look and you want a compact body, because the newer Sony cameras that are full frame are a lot larger, this can actually still be a nice option for photography. And for video, yeah, it's okay. It doesn't have that much detail. And again, you don't have the flip screen, you don't have a large battery. I also think it has the 30-minute record limit. So it's a nice extra bonus that it has the video capabilities. But don't get this camera for video. Okay, so this is a quick video and microphone test of the Sony A7R Mark I. Right now I'm using an APS-C lens on it, which is the Sigma 60mm f1.4. This camera is definitely not meant for video because you can see that the video quality, it's not that sharp. And you also don't have a flip screen, so it's not meant for vlogging. There's also no IBIS in this camera, which is the in-body image stabilisation, which means that you need to have lenses that are optically stabilized, or if you don't have a lens that has optical stabilization, then it will be a little bit more difficult to get a stable shot. You need to use higher shutter speeds, which will result in more noise if you're shooting in low light. Also, there are no slow motion options on this camera and the microphone quality is just decent. Luckily, it does have nice stereo separation, so it has one mic on each side, but the microphone quality itself isn't anything special. So should you still buy this 10-year-old Sony A7R Mark I in 2025? Well, if you like doing photography, maybe as a hobby, but even for professional work, you might actually be able to take some nice photos with this thing. Again, it's not meant for video, but for photography, you can get some really nice results with this camera. It does have a few limitations, obviously. It has a small battery, the autofocus isn't as good as the newer models, and the burst mode is only like 4 FPS. But other than that, if you don't mind having to wait a few seconds for the autofocus, then this is actually still a really nice camera that you can shoot great images with, even in 2025 and later. So what do you think of this Sony A7R Mark I? Let me know in the comments down below, and thank you so much for watching.